this is your host, Julia Napini. I am a clinical and forensic social worker who owns a counseling practice and a consulting business. In this show, we discuss the challenges of being successful in business while maintaining your integrity and staying true to yourself. Join me while I interview other professionals and share insights from life and experience. Let's talk about RingRx, our latest sponsor. RingRx is a high-quality, HIPAA-compliant telephone, text, and fax communications platform. They provide seamless, cost-effective communications for behavioral therapists, medical practices, hospitals, and other healthcare providers. RingRx is designed for modern healthcare environments. They offer customizable features like a phone app, automated patient outreach, voicemail, after-hours call routing, and top-quality desk phones. Try RingRx for free today at ringrx.com. And if you sign up using the code CLIMB, you'll get 15% off your monthly bill forever. Conditions apply. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Compassionate Climb podcast. I have a very in-demand and highly recommended guest for you all here today. And we are going to talk about redefining success by embracing our identity, creating balance, and maintaining authenticity in the face of professional pressures. So this is going to be a good one. Katesha Reid, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'm so happy to have you. So I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and sharing your journey, the work that you do, and more about you with the audience. So fill everybody in. What is it that you do and anything that's significant that helped you to get there?
Okay. So I am a licensed professional counselor and a women's identity expert. In simple terms, I help women reconnect with who they are outside of their roles, outside of their identities, and beyond being somebody's something. A little known fact that I think is important is that I have 3 children, so I bring a different perspective. And not that I have 3 children, but they are spread out like 16, 9, and 3. So
that's a range.
So I jokingly say I'm teaching one to drive and one to potty train at the same time. But the perspective I think it brings is I'm in different areas of parenting, and so I'm super excited. I love talking to women about redefining things on their terms and living life on their terms and connecting with themselves. Before we became moms and wives and all the amazing things we are, we were, and we sometimes lose sight of her.
Yes. I don't know that there's any woman listening who wouldn't be able to relate to that. So my biggest question is, when did this shift happen for you? I'm assuming that that's not something that always came easy for you.
No, it's not always came easy. And I tell people it's a constant thing. It's an everyday decision. But it really started for me when my oldest daughter was 2 years old. She was between 2 and 4, so kind of off and on then, more so towards the 4-year-old mark. And I just realized that I loved being her mom. I loved being married. But there was a part of me that still wasn't fulfilled. And I didn't know how to say that. And so I struggled in silence for a while, because how can you say these things? Like, this is supposed to be what you do in life. You get married, you have kids. That was the route that you're supposed to take. And so I felt really guilty for a very long time, not feeling completely fulfilled. And so I went into a very dark space. And I share with people that I was a therapist during this time. So I was a therapist by day, but completely unhinged is what I felt like at night. Ungrateful. I felt guilty. I felt alone because I had not seen anyone talk about that. And so when I came out of that dark space and I started talking to other women was like, oh yeah, I had moments where I lost myself, or I had to start doing these things. And I was frustrated because no one was talking about it. And I decided at that moment, not another woman that I had access to would deal with that alone and deal with that in shame.
Well, I'm grateful to hear that that's where you ended up after that experience, and that when you did share more of what you were going through, you were met with other women who could relate. But the therapist in me wants to unpack this a little bit. So during that time, what were some of the reasons why you initially were resistant to open up about that?
I think it was embarrassment. You know, number one, you're a therapist and you don't have everything. I was new in the field. So to be
Yeah.
a therapist and not have everything together felt taboo to me. Now I
Mm-hmm.
know that is definitely not the case, but it felt that way then. Like, how can you help people when you can't help yourself? I didn't want my husband to feel like, what have I gotten into? I didn't want people to feel like she's not appreciative of having a child. And
Sure.
so it was a lot of shame.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that honesty. And
Yeah.
those were some of the things that were coming into my mind as I was thinking about times in my life where I can relate to what you're describing and why I might hesitate. If we are people pleasers, if we
Yes.
sometimes make decisions out of obligation, if we're
Yes.
feeling some of that societal pressure that comes with being a
Oh,
mom,
yes.
being a professional,
Yes.
being a wife, then all of those things can weigh in and those voices in our head can crank up and get really loud. And
Yes.
so what do you think contributed to you finally getting to that place of being more open and sharing? And where were some of the first spaces where you started to do that?
I would say I shared with a friend first. And
Mm-hmm.
we had just been Facebook friends, and I shared with her, and her response was, "Oh, girl, that happens all the time. We've all been through that." And I said, "No, I don't. I didn't. My mom never did that." And she said, "Have you ever asked her?"
Mm-hmm.
And I realized it wasn't that people weren't sharing. I had never asked anybody. You know, when we deal with shame, you know how we feel isolated, we feel we're
Mm-hmm.
alone, and really other people are dealing with it. And so talking to her gave me the space to talk to another friend,
Mm-hmm.
and then maybe ask my mom, "Hey, did you ever feel lost and confused?" And she was like, "Oh yeah, absolutely."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I want to talk about this more. Yeah.
Yeah, so the floodgates opened at that point.
Oh gosh,
So
yes.
I'm curious, as you started having more of these conversations, before you got to the point where you were helping other women with the same,
Mm.
what were the things that were really helpful for you? Describe your process to us. What did that look like? When you noticed there
Yeah.
was that disconnect, you started opening up about it, and then where did you go from there?
So being able to say it out loud, being able to
Mm-hmm.
share with my husband, "Hey, I need something else," or "I miss myself," and being affirmed in my relationship that, hey, you haven't been doing the things you used to do. You have really been pouring everything into this.
Mm-hmm.
And so being affirmed and people holding space for me. And then so I started small. I would like go to a park and just sit there. And I would sit in the car at first because I didn't want people to judge me. I was at a park with no kids. But I used to, before I had a daughter, go to the park and write poetry.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to the park and I would sit in the car. Then I would go back to the park the next week and I would sit at the table, and so just doing those small things, but really talking about it a lot and really acknowledging that you have put everything to the side. And the reality is, I got married young and had my daughter. I was about 25 when I got my daughter. Had my daughter, but I was 19 when I got married. It was the reality that I honestly didn't even know who I was
Mm-hmm.
before I entered into those roles. So that reality, sometimes we lose ourselves, but sometimes we never really developed
Mm-hmm.
who we were. And so that was a
Absolutely.
whole process in and of itself. Who am I
Mm-hmm.
now that I'm an adult?
Yeah, I think that's such an important distinction that it can kind of be one of two scenarios. It's either
Yeah.
that you realize that getting back to the basics of who you were at a previous time that was more in alignment is where you need to start. And for other people, and it sounds like in your situation, getting married at the age that you did and
Yeah.
then becoming a mom when you did,
Hmm.
maybe you hadn't done a lot of that process to discover a lot of those things. So poetry was one thing that helped get you back. What
Oh,
would
yeah.
you suggest for someone in a similar situation? I would assume that it's easier when we already can identify those activities that we can engage in,
Hmm.
places that we can go, people that really help to see us and get
Yeah.
us back on track. What about
Yeah.
for those that maybe haven't had the opportunity to go through that process and figure it out for themselves?
I would say, so I encourage women to try everything.
Mm-hmm.
Try everything because you don't know what you don't like or what you do like until you try it. So
Mm-hmm.
try anything you think you might like. You think you might like a cooking class? Try that. You think you might like an exercise group? Try that. You never
Mm-hmm.
know. And we have these limits. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a mom, I can't do this. Or because I'm a mom, I can't go here. And that's not necessarily true. So try everything and really spend time with yourself. So
Mm-hmm.
I started asking myself very simple questions as if I was a 17-year-old girl taking a quiz in the Cosmopolitan magazine, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, like, what is my favorite food? What is my favorite color? What things make me happy? If I close my eyes and imagine myself doing something, what does that look like? What
Mm-hmm.
am I doing? And so for me, I saw myself doing things like traveling. And I would write that down because
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to try that at some point. Or I would write down things I maybe think I like. I think I would like to go to a poetry night. I'm not sure. Let me write that down. Instead of immediately saying, well, you have kids, you can't go do this at 7 o'clock at night. That's not necessarily real. So just allow yourself to dream big
Mm-hmm.
without the without your current circumstances.
Yeah.
I liken it to when I've asked a kindergartner before what they want to be. And this one little girl always sticks out to me. She was like, I want to be an astronaut princess. Now, I don't know what that is, but no one told her no. And I told her, I think she'd be an amazing astronaut princess. And so as a
Mm-hmm.
mom, as a woman, think about what you might like. Even if
Yeah.
I had a mom tell me she wanted to try a stand-up comedy, then do it. But we feel like because we are moms or we're in certain roles, we can't do those things. And that's not true.
Listening to you speak, it's making me feel that the possibilities are truly endless. It's
Yes.
really about if you want it bad enough, if you're willing
Mm-hmm.
to make a sacrifice and
Yes.
prioritize. And
Yes.
not that we have to try everything right now. You
No.
try something and then you see whether or not that fits or that works or it
Yeah.
brings you joy. And then if it does, then that's something that you keep in your back pocket or make a regular part of your routine.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, you move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of us have a hard time going back to those basics because, like you were suggesting, a lot of times these messages creep back into our heads that
Oh,
because we
yes.
have these other responsibilities, or maybe it's a financial thing, or I should be doing this instead, that it can talk us out of sometimes taking that step and doing it for us. What would you say to combat
Yeah.
that?
I would say those societal pressures that you speak of are that weighed a lot. That weighed a lot. You have to redefine motherhood for you. What does that look like for you? If you
Mm-hmm.
could tune out all the voices, because a lot of times we don't do things because we didn't see other mothers do them. What does it look like for you? And
Mm-hmm.
I had to go through that process. I often share, I travel a lot for my business, right? That's a dream, that's a sacrifice I'm willing to make. When I first started traveling, my mom's response, and I know she meant no harm, but she brings her own what she knew about motherhood, what she
Sure.
did in motherhood. She would say, you travel a lot. I think your husband may want you to stop traveling. And I was like, well, he didn't say that. But to her, that wasn't something she had seen. Now, my father traveled for work, so that was normal. But a woman, a mom traveling, was not something my mom had experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And so to her, this is not this. I don't know if this is okay.
Yeah.
I could have and did take a pause to say maybe she's right. It's
Mm-hmm.
our mom. We think everything they say is golden. But when I start to think about not doing that thing, it saddened me. And I
Mm.
realized I didn't want to show up that way. And I didn't have to, right? So there's sacrifices and priorities that I have to shift. But I learned at that moment I could redefine motherhood for me.
Yeah.
I often say we all wear the hat of mom, wife, or whatever, but my mom hat doesn't have to look like your mom hat. I had a period where I stayed at home. I didn't enjoy it, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean I didn't enjoy my kids. Staying at home was not for me.
Yeah.
And once we start to lose other people's expectations, that gives us a different level of returning or defining our own identity.
You made some great points there that I want to highlight. And one in particular is when we may seek out the opinion, some
Mm-hmm.
validation, or even just sounding board of
Yeah.
somebody in our life that we value their perspective, like our mothers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And they respond in a way that isn't maybe what we were expecting, or maybe it is what we were expecting, but not necessarily what we wanted to hear.
Right.
Going into that conversation, knowing that very oftentimes people are responding from their place, their
Yes.
experience, their belief system,
Yes.
that's not always aligned with ours. And I think it's so important to hear that that doesn't mean that it's wrong for you. And it doesn't
Exactly.
mean that that person won't ultimately come around when they see it bringing about in you a better
Yes.
frame of mind, a better experience
Yes.
in your life. The people in our lives that are truly there for us want us to be happy. They just may not be able to envision that in the ways that we have. And just because they wouldn't do it, it doesn't mean that it isn't the right thing for
Yeah.
you. What would you say to that?
Yeah. I would say you described that so beautifully because
Mm,
while there was a fear of what she would say, because I knew I couldn't stop doing it.
right.
I wasn't willing to stop doing it, and I
Right.
actually was about to ramp it up. I had a conversation with my husband to make sure we were aligned, and he even went through a process where he had to understand certain things I was doing as far as like building a business and things like that. He realized and he saw, like you explained, what it did for me
Hmm.
and how it truly made me light up. This
Yeah.
is what she is supposed to be doing.
Right.
And so he's very supportive. My mom, even now, when I travel, is very supportive because,
Hmm.
again, she saw that that is something that brings me joy.
Mm.
One of the things I tell people is when we give in to societal pressures, I wonder if we could have some conversations with our moms and grandmothers and things about are there things you wanted to do that
Hmm.
you weren't able to? That gives us perspective. I
Yeah.
was talking to a group one day and there was a lady there with her daughter. So she was a grandmother, the mom was the mother. And she said, I love seeing my daughter. I think the daughter started some kind of business. I love seeing that because that
Hmm.
wasn't an option.
Yeah.
There wasn't an option. So we assume that the women we see are living these lives because they chose it. But based on the generation, based on the family, some
Hmm.
of these things weren't chosen. That was the life they were given and
Yes.
the things they had access to.
Absolutely. And that is most definitely going to shape the response that they give you.
Yes.
And so, you doing that could even open up some potential possibilities for the other individuals in your life that are seeing
Yes.
you have this idea, put it
Yes.
into action, what that's doing for you, your family. And
Yes.
these individuals might even benefit from that. It could just be that
Absolutely.
ripple effect of being surrounded by somebody like you who's living in their truth, living
Yeah.
authentically, experiencing more joy than they would have if they hadn't taken these steps. But you also could share some of this travel or some of these stories
Yes.
and experiences that could
Yes.
enhance their own lives.
Yeah.
So I think it can
Yeah.
just take off
That
from there
brings a different level
potentially.
of joy when you see people get the ripple effect of it. So, if I go with my mom, if she comes with me to a speaking engagement and she sees the women,
Hmm.
that gives her a different level of joy. So then that gives me a different level of joy. Or my mom is a full time grandmother. And so when her and my dad do get to go on outings alone, and I'm like, hey, cut your phone off. We will figure it out. We'll keep the grandkids, like just focus on you and
Yes.
him. Seeing her prioritize that, is beautiful. And one of the things that brings me ultimate joy is knowing that because I have two daughters and a son, I am showing them a different way.
Mm.
If you choose to be a mom and if you choose to travel, you see that this is okay. If you choose not to travel, you see this is okay. And more on a wider scale, I want you to define motherhood for you. You don't have to do it a certain way. It doesn't have to look a certain way. I want you to honor yourself. And I want them to be able to look back and say, hey, my mom honored her
Mm.
definition of motherhood. And
Yes.
I can do that too.
Katesha, it never fails. I am always in awe when I'm interviewing someone. The timing is always perfect. It's always what I need to hear in the moment that I need to hear it. And I hope it's the same thing for the listeners. So for
Yeah.
me, reflecting back on 2024 and thinking about everything that is in motion in 2025, there is a lot of travel coming for this gal. And I have one daughter, and I have a lot of these similar thoughts that go through my head
Yeah.
that you, I'm sure, have had before getting to where
Absolutely.
you are now. And everything that you're saying, I'm just going to let sit, marinate, digest a little bit, because what you just described, the model that we're setting for our children, that the sky really is the limit. And if
Yeah.
you want something, then it's achievable. And it's a big world out there, but there
Yes.
are opportunities and things that they probably would not have necessarily seen
Yeah.
as possible if it wasn't somebody so close to them doing it. And I think that's such an
Absolutely.
important message. So I appreciate that very
Thank
much.
you. Thank you. Absolutely.
Yeah, so I would love
Absolutely.
to hear. I'm very interested in your process in working with women in a coaching capacity, and then
Okay.
we'll talk about speaking. So, what does
Okay.
that process typically look like? I'm sure that it can be very individualized, but are there
Yeah.
some set steps that you follow?
Yes. Yes. And so when we first meet, it's a lot of validation, and affirmation, because women are still coming in feeling like, yeah, I may have heard you say this, or, but I still feel like I'm isolated. So it's a lot of having a safe space to even say the things that they have felt, So it's a lot of that validation, affirmation, and then it's a lot of, well, you're talking about getting back to my identity, but who am I really? And that's the fun part for me, because that's when we're dreaming. We're
Mm-hmm.
dreaming without circumstances. So I start off by just asking a simple question: what is your dream car? And they will say, I would like this, but right now, and I'm like, but no, 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 that's including your circumstances. And so as they start to dream, because they have a dream, they just have never really spoken it. People can very clearly tell me their dream car, very clearly. I want this, and I want this package, and this and this and that. And it only starts to minimize when you think about, oh, but it's going to cost. But that's not, I just want you to focus on the dream. Or if you could do anything, what would it be? Um,
Mm,
and even if they're in an established career, so I see a lot of nurses. So I say, I know that you have a nursing degree. If you left the nursing home or hospital, wherever you are, what would you be doing? Because we live in a unique time where anything can be a job. Anything. There's a nurse
mm-hmm.
in my area who started a hydration clinic. Like, you can do anything. And so
Yeah.
getting them to dream and getting them to think about how close they are to their dream.
Mm-hmm.
So if you say you wanted a neighborhood of, just say, a lady told me she wanted a neighborhood of single moms. And I say, okay, have you ever priced the land? And she was like, no, I can't afford that. But have you priced the land? We discount ourselves before we get started. So
Yeah.
after we do the affirmation and validation and we start to dream, I have 50 questions that we go down that
Mm-hmm.
seem very simple, but what I want the women to see is sometimes we're exposed to something that doesn't mean it's ours. And what I mean by that is, in my house with the 3-year-old, I watch a lot of Blippi. Blippi is not my favorite show. I love Blippi, but Blippi is not my favorite show. But if you were to ask me, I may immediately say that because it's always on.
Right.
Or I may immediately say, oh, I like hot dogs. But that may be because I have them often. That is not my favorite. And a lot of these
Mm,
women, and I was there too, we live life based on circumstances.
yeah.
My kids like this, so this is what I buy. But I'm trying to get you to know you,
Mm-hmm.
get to know you. And then you can decide, like we talked about the fork in the road, are you going back to her or a different version of her? Or are
Mm-hmm.
you learning a new her?
Yeah.
And that's where the light bulb really starts to go off, knowing that this is a possibility. People just need to know and to see it and to be validated that it is
Mm-hmm.
okay. And then at the end, we kind of talk about the sacrifices and the priority.
Mm-hmm.
Because the unspoken thing we all know, we do love our kids. We do have kids to take care of. I can't travel 365 days, but I can do X, Y, and Z. And I
Mm-hmm.
believe in the life of and not or. And
Yeah.
that's the motivating behind a lot of decisions I make. I feel like I can have all these things, maybe not at one time. Um, if I'm traveling the first and the third weekend, I got to really get a lot of family time in between.
Yeah.
But I can still do it.
Sure. I appreciate you walking us through your process. And the part that sticks with me is the exercise where you're having people identify their dream car. And I'm
Yes.
thinking about how so easily we can shut down the idea for reasons that you mentioned. And you're
Yes.
encouraging women to not only have that internal dialogue, but to externalize it, say it
Yes.
out loud, say it to another person,
Yes.
and then really open up the possibilities. Think big. If
Yes.
there weren't those limitations in place, what would it be? And then I could even see that benefit of just sticking with that same example. What would it feel like to drive that
Yes.
car?
Yes.
Where would it take you when you
Yes.
have that and you're pulling into the driveway and, going to wherever you're going? How is that going to elevate your life potentially in some
Yes.
ways by being the type of person in that vehicle, going those places, doing those things?
Yes.
So I can see how helpful it is to not only just have that thought, but to really think it through, speak it out, and
Yeah.
have a lot of those tangibles that we can so easily stop ourselves from even
Yeah.
conceptualizing.
And people is uncomfortable at first, but people really get excited and get specific and
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, oh, see, because we know we just are like cringing at the thought of the price or
Yeah.
cringing at, well, how could I buy this if my kids need this? And for most people, your kids are not going without anything. We're
Mm-hmm.
just overthinking.
Yes, I can see that happening
Yeah.
often. So I'm thinking from kind of one mom entrepreneur whose goal in 2025 was to travel more, but travel speaking so that it's a way to
Yes.
combine experiencing the world, connecting and networking with other like-minded people,
Yeah.
sharing the knowledge that I've acquired, but doing that in a way that, combines that with work and pleasure.
Yeah.
And I was able to successfully, in my opinion, do that, but it's still a work in progress. What are
Yeah.
some tips that you have for those listening that are interested in landing more speaking engagements? Where do you start? How do you keep the momentum going?
Yeah. And I would say for me, it's still a work in progress too. But what I
Mm-hmm.
have found to be helpful is finding like minded people.
Mm-hmm.
Every While we are open to defining things on our terms, the reality is everybody is not. And that's okay. There was a time where we were not. I know for me, there was a time I was not. Like, what do you mean I'm going to be a business owner? What do you mean I'm going to be away from my kids? What do you mean I'm not going to cook 5 course meals 7 days a week? Like, what do you mean? But when you got to that place and you opened up, your life changed. So when
Mm-hmm.
you find other like minded people, they will present you with other opportunities. And
Mm-hmm.
it starts with putting yourself out there. Had I not put myself out there and met Amy, then I would not have met you. And
So
who
true.
knows who else I will meet or where other places our paths will cross. And
Mm-hmm.
also, meeting like minded people will encourage you when you want to give up, when you
Yeah.
feel like I can't do this or this is too much. You need people to remind you of your goal. Hey, let's
Mm-hmm.
get together and look up some opportunities. You know, let's see
Mm-hmm.
how we can shift some priorities and some sacrifices here so that you can make this. So a
Right.
lot of it is just showing up because people are looking for us.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be women that listen to this podcast who are going to realize they are not alone,
Mm-hmm.
who are going to realize that it is okay if I want to do the thing.
Yeah.
If you asked our mothers and grandmothers about podcasting, about talking to a stranger online, that is unheard of to them. What are
Mm-hmm.
you even talking about? And look at us. People do this every day.
Yeah.
So just put ourselves out there, show up, connect with like minded people so that you can then be in the right spaces.
Mm-hmm.
So the opportunities will be aligned with you.
Yeah. Beautifully said. I really appreciate that. Is there anything that we didn't cover today that you would really like to speak on and share with our listeners?
I would just say that a lot of focus is on the external pressures, the external labels. We also have internal things that we hold internally that keep us stagnant. at certain times. So while we are shifting our communities and our circles to be in different places, for people externally, we also have to do the internal work.
Yeah.
Figure out where these thoughts came from, give them back to the people they belong to, because a lot of the things don't belong to us.
Mm-hmm.
And be okay with living life on your terms. At the end of the day, you have to honor you, and it is okay.
Mm-hmm. What a great message to leave everyone with. So let everyone know the best way to follow your journey, work with you if they're interested, listen to you speak. What's the best way for them
So
to do
I am
that?
on Facebook under my name, Katie Reid. My business page is Katie Reid LPC. I am on Instagram under Beyond Someone Something. And my website is www.youaremorethans.com.
Thank you so much. And I will include all of that in the notes to make it easy for everyone. Thank you so much for coming on the show today and everything that you shared. It was very helpful for me. I'm hoping the same for those listening.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
If you like what you're hearing, please rate and review. This will help others find us and benefit as well. The Compassionate Climb podcast represents the opinions of Julia Napini and her guests. The information provided is intended for educational purposes only and should not be taken as legal advice. If that is what you are seeking, please consult an attorney.